we good to go?
Yes, we
All
are.
right. So Judith did, well, first of all, good evening. Thank you all for coming out. Judith did introduce Rusty, but I want to say something before we start the interview proper. This is certainly true for me. There are other radio hosts in the audience, but I maintain that radio people, I started doing radio when I was 18. I think we have influences just like musicians do. So when I got the opportunity to get on the air in college, I tried to imitate people I heard growing up here. A lot of people on WHUR, for example. But this is, Rusty is someone I learned from as a programmer, as someone who didn't just play the music, but delved into and provided you, the listener, myself, with a lot of information. So I have radio fathers and sisters. So anyway, so it's a great honor for me to sit and talk to somebody who's had an impact on, well, certainly this community, probably not just myself. So thank you first and foremost. Thanks for agreeing to do this. So I think I was mentally taking notes last month when you were asking questions and starting to formulate this game plan for tonight. And then I heard, this is true, I was on the bus, on the X2 bus, and this woman started singing some songs from The Sound of Music. And I thought, well, let's start at the, that line, let's start at the beginning, a very good place to start. So I'm going to go take your cue and think about the woman who was singing through the Andy on X2, and ask you to talk about your upbringing, your family,
Sure.
where music began to tap you on the shoulder.
Sure, okay. Although I was actually born in Bound Brook, New Jersey, on November 26, 1945, which is a significant date in jazz history. Although I didn't find that out when I was born, of course. When I got into music, it was Charlie Parker's first date as a leader, where he recorded Now's the Time and Coco. And that was because my mother was from New Jersey, but already living in Greenwich, Connecticut, with my father. And I was the firstborn in a family. We had, I had 3 siblings, twin brother and sister, and then a younger brother who's still living. And grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. My father had a liquor store. So he was a shopkeeper. He wasn't part of the Greenwich elite. He was selling booze to people there. And, even before then, he had a tavern. And, it was an Irish Catholic alcohol connection, I guess. And so I went to Catholic schools. I went to a Jesuit high school in Fairfield Prep. And Boy Scout. Became an Eagle Scout, altar boy, all the good upbringing type stuff, and then I went on the road.
Oh my gosh! When you were still in school?
Yeah, it was about 14 or so, that age, we used to start thinking, God, all these guys from the 40s and 50s and beats, and I was feeling bad I missed out on that, kind of emulated it. But for the music, I was listening to popular music on the radio, the Drifters, Elvis Presley or whatever. Sarah Vaughan had a hit with a song called Broken Hearted Melody, and so I listened to that. But then there was all instrumental music. There was Topsy, Part 1 and Part 2 with Cozy Cole, things that were on 45s, they make their way into top 40. Now that was really drawing me into, sort of popular jazz of the mid-50s when you're about 10 or 11. And then when I was about 12 years old, it was New Year's Day, I was making a model airplane. That was my passion. I was making World War II fighter planes and bombers and stuff. And I was making this model airplane on New Year's Day, listening to the radio, twisting the dial around. And somebody was playing this older music. And it was a 1938 Carnegie Hall Betty Goodman concert that had come out on LP about 5 years earlier, and this is thinking
Spiritual
back on it.
Swing?
No, this is
No.
this is before the Spiritual
Okay,
Swing concert. This is Benny Goodman's concert, and in this concert he had guest artists from Duke Ellington. He had Johnny Hodges and Cootie Williams. From Count Basie, he had Count Basie himself, Lester Young, Freddie Green was on the date. There was a jam session, and this music just drew me into it. You know, wow, this is something else. So I found the album at Woolworths. So there was a couple of volumes. So my first album was Benny Goodman's Carnegie Hall concert, and I found out later that was the introduction to a lot of folks coming up in the 50s. You know, growing into hearing Lester Young for the first time, for example. And so I started twisting the dial on the radio, and I don't know how I discovered it, but my third album was an album called Diz and Bird on the Royal Roost label. It was this Carnegie Hall concert. The album didn't have any information about the date or anything, even who the side people were. And the surface noise on it was incredible. But Charlie Parker cut through, Dizzy Gillespie cut through. You know, this was it. The public library in Greenwich had a music section, so you could check out LPs. So my introduction to Miles was Relaxing with Miles Davis, taking that out of the library. A sampler album of Columbia had All Blues from Kind of Blue, and Better Get It in Your Soul from Mingus Own. All the stuff from 1959 was on the sampler album I got out of the library. So I was getting introduced to the music, and in a closet, I discovered some 78s. My mother was not a jazz person. She wasn't listening to jazz on the radio. And my father liked things like Sing Along with Mitch. You know, he was not hip at all. Well, my mother, in her youth, evidently was. She had Woody Herman's Woodchopper's Ball, and then in a booklet, the concert, it was the first concert, Jazz at the Philharmonic, and on the label they identified the musicians, and the pianist was identified as Shorty Nadine. It took me a while to find out it was Nat King Cole many years later, but you know, Illinois Jacquette, J.J. Johnson. I think it was like she had Body and Soul, which was on about 4 sides. You had to flip it through and then flip it over, and then there was Rosetta. So that was what she had. And I guess she figured I was into Benny Goodman's quartet, listening to Lionel Hampton. You know, so she took me to hear Lionel Hampton at a local junior high school. So I had some fascinating experiences with Lionel Hampton. Got to hear him when I was about 11 or 12. And then many years later, when George Wein took over the Kennedy Center for the Cool Jazz Festival, I was the MC in the Opera House. And Lionel Hampton closed the Opera House, and I got to shut down Lionel Hampton when he wanted to stay play.
Now, did your friends, your peers listen to jazz?
In my high school, there was a handful of hip people. You know, when other people are getting into the rock of, this is like 1960 through 1963 when I was in high school, there were a handful of us. You know, and some of the albums that we'd be talking about, you'd be Art Blakey and Jazz Messengers with Thelonious Monk. That Atlantic album, which I still think is incredible. It gets diminished in the criticisms of Monk's music and Blakey's, but I thought it was very avant-garde, and still today, you know, it's one of those that we'd be talking about listening, you know. And, the Impulse label was just starting. So, you know, Ray Charles, Genius plus Jazz equals Soul, or something. You know, these albums were coming out. And the same couple of guys, we were listening to Gene Shepard every night and talking about what stories he was telling on the radio.
So radio was obviously went along with it.
Right, so radio definitely went along with it.
Right.
Searching the dial, I discovered Symphony Sid. Symphony Sid was doing radio in the early 60s out of New York. and things like Maynard 61 with Olay, that slide Hampton composition. Stan Getz, I'm late with the strings on Focus. So those were the great records that he was playing on the radio. And I had a buddy, Scott Butch Feddick, lost touch with him 40, 50 years ago, but he was one of those, tag me along, come on, let's do this. So these two white kids be going into Harlem, going into Small's Paradise, and, or the Daily News Jazz Festival at Madison Square Garden, where Maynard Ferguson had the band that had the Maynard 61. The Dave Brubeck Quartet performed, and Carmen and Cray sang with it. It was that one she doing Paradiddle Joe. Sonny Rollins with Jim Hall just came out with the bridge, you know. So this was, you know, 62, I think. I like to really research the Daily News Jazz Festival at Madison Square Garden to get all the details. But it was just, you know, Chris Connor sang with Maynard's band, you know. So it was, you know, so it was just all this stuff that I was being drawn into while still in high school. After I graduated high school that summer, Butch and I told our parents we were going to spend the weekend at each other's house. We drove my 54 Studebaker across the state to Newport, Rhode Island for the Newport Jazz Festival. And it was, you know, that one from July of '63 was just incredible. And the thing that I remember most, of course, was Jimmy Smith playing and not wanting to stop, having people, you know, standing on the chairs, dancing and stuff like that. And they were announcing that John Coltrane was going to be recorded, you know, and of course, Train was the last, and it was like people splitting. But that was the one where he did my favorite things, impressions, and I Want to Talk About You, with McCoy Tyner piano, Jimmy Garrett's bass, and Roy Haynes on drums. In one of the afternoon performances, Herbie Mann performed with his Afro-Cuban rhythm section, Tato Valdez and people like that. And that record came out later on that year. They recorded it, and the Coltrane stuff didn't come out until years later. But it was a performance, you know, just hearing Coltrane doing my favorite things, you know.
I was thinking a couple of things when you mentioned on the road in high school, and the fact that there were references and are references to musicians, you know, in that book. Like he talks about, is it The Hunt with Wardell Gray?
Oh yeah, yeah, sure.
And there's there's a part in the book when they're listening to these musicians, and I think they're in Denver, and he says this guy sounds like a young Miles Davis. So you know, just how. Well, where you got taken us to this point, and how these things, the radio and then literature. So, had you harbored any secret desire to be on the radio? I mean, you're beginning this affair with the music.
What my affair with the music was, I wanted to be like Nat Hentoff, Ralph J. Gleason, Ira Gittler, who just passed away. I was reading the back album covers. I was learning about the music from back of the records. So I figured being a liner note writer, you know, being on the radio at that time was not my view, you know, at all. You know, it was like I was a listener and didn't aspire even to be a musician at the time. I was just the ultimate fan, you know, and. As I got to college, and the blues revival was going on, so we were multifaceted in hearing the artists.
Where were you?
So, well, going to this Jesuit high school, Fairfield Prep, in the early '60s, they wouldn't give you recommendations to non-Catholic colleges. You know, it's like, and so I applied to Boston College, University of Connecticut, UConn, and Georgetown, and so it was, you know, I was accepted at Boston College and Georgetown, and you know, I mean silly stuff, but stuff that means to you. Washington had an 18 drinking age for beer. And, you know, I was, you know, already into, you know, drinking beer and stuff at age 17. I figured that'd be easier to deal with, you know. These are things that adolescent minds go into. You know? I wasn't going to go to Notre Dame, you know, it's there, you know. It's like, I'm going to go to a Catholic college, you know, Washington, D.C. So I put my LPs into my trunk there, down in D.C. in September of 1963 and came to Washington. And living in a dorm, I didn't even have a record player in my room. I shared a room with 2 other students. There was a poet that you're probably familiar with as a poet, J.D. McClatchy, lived on my hall. And he was very wealthy, and he had a real high-end stereo in his room. I'd use his earphones, go in his room and listen to either my LPs or his. He had Miles Porgy Best. And listening to that in the earphones back then was really something. And having a little radio going around the dial, I discovered Felix Green on WMAL. And read ads about who was performing where around that time. Didn't get out too much as a freshman. And it was my sophomore year when I lived off campus. And one of my roommates went to George Washington University. There were 2 of us from Georgetown, a couple of us from GW. So we were hitting different spots, you know. And it was around that time, actually even before then, because when I first came to D.C., I discovered a bar that just opened up. And it had jazz jukebox. And it was just amazing the music that was on the jukebox. And then, in my sophomore year, I was 17, so I wasn't even of age when I first went into this place. And years later, when I joked with Joe Cohen about it, the owner of the One Step Down got really pissed off at me for being underage. Go to this club. You couldn't take a joke about it. But in any case, that was one of the hangouts. It was a bar for the jukebox.
So cool.
And a bunch of students. There was no live music at the One Step at that time. But my roommate, Toby Mason, and I, we went to Bohemian Caverns. And there was a big truck parked outside. And, you know, we're trying to figure out we were really vague about who we were going to see. I thought maybe it was Les McCann playing. Well, it was Ramsey Lewis. And Ramsey Lewis recorded the in-crowd. You know, recorded the in-crowd. So there we are in the audience clapping in the background of the in-crowd. And a couple of weeks later, by myself, borrowing somebody's car, or maybe I had my own, still working. I had a 56 Buick that was kind of raggedy. And if it wasn't running, I'd borrow somebody's. But I went to see John Coltrane. And I'll never forget walking down the steps, going downstairs, you know, the stalactite stuff and all that. And there's Jimmy Garrison by himself on this long bass intro, you know, and then Elvin comes over and McCoy, and John Coltrane just gives this incredibly intense performance. This is 1965. This is May of '65 maybe. And after the performance is over with, Mr. Coltrane's walking by like where you are from me. And I kept saying, what do I say? That sounds like bullshit. I can't say that. You know, I just got tongue-tied, you know. And so he just walked by, you know. And years later, when I got to know McCoy Tyner from numerous conversations at the bar of the Blues Alley, he'd spent so much time talking with me. I told him that story, and he laughed. He said Coltrane wouldn't have bit your head off. He would talk to you all night long about music. He'll talk sports. But that was the one regret was I didn't say hi, you know, didn't speak, you know. But it was just the experience. You know?
I mean, here you are.
Yeah.
It's similar to what I was saying last month with, you know, like father and his friends in these same places, and the proximity to these artists. Now, what was your major in school?
I was an English major, English literature. Yeah, so I was an English major, and in my junior year, right outside the campus, there's this place still there called 1789, and a real fancy restaurant that's a part of it. And during the early 60s, next door to the 1789, there's more of a working class type lunch counter that served beer. And one afternoon, I'm in there with some friends drinking beer. Well, I should have been studying, you know, but yeah, right. So there's this guy standing ordering something at the counter, but holding it with this one arm while he's, you know, putting the order in was jazz albums. And so, you know how we always are hipper than now. You want to see what somebody else has. So I said, oh, at least see what you got, you know. And you know, it may have been Willis Jackson, Blue Gator, or whatever it was, you know, and stuff like the Prestige album. You know, I don't remember exactly. But we started talking, and he said, well, you know, I just use these albums on my radio show, but I got to give it up to take a class. Do you want to do it? And I said, sure. He said, well, come by next WGTV. We had an FM station on campus, 90.1 on the dial. He said, come by next Monday. I'm on from 4:30 to 6:30. Just come by a little bit before. I'll show you what to do, and it's yours. That's how I got into radio.
Wow.
It was all accidental. Serendipity came into my life. You know. So I started, I did the show my junior year and my senior year, and you know, student run station. So they were off the air for summers. And after I graduated in June of 1967, and one of the real significant events in my life occurred right after I graduated. A friend of mine, John Reddy, who had been involved with SNCC in Southwest Georgia in the summer of '66, he got involved in civil rights stuff. And his father was a writer for Reader's Digest, and he ghost wrote Jack Parr's books, and so John was into a whole other realm from me in terms of people he knew and stuff like that. He got involved in civil rights, and he said, another friend of ours, he said, Ed and I are going to be in Louisville in Sunflower County. We'll already be there. Can you drive my car with Willie? He had a black friend who was in his 50s who, borderline criminal, you know, always in trouble, you know the type, you know, and he was going to drive with us. And then, oh, by the way, Randy wants to go with us. So Randy Parr, Jack Parr's daughter, said, drive the car down, we're going to bring some clothes down. So this is June 1967. I'm driving from D.C. with this black guy who liked to drive at 105. We stocked up on liquor, and Randy, you know, and clothes and other stuff to take with us. We stopped in Chattanooga. He had relatives there, so I actually had my first taste of White Lightning, you know, in Chattanooga. And we go to Louisville, Mississippi, and I met Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. She was still registering people to vote. You know, she was doing stuff in Louisville, and you know, the weird juxtaposition of there was a carry-out place near this section of town where she lived, and the white teenagers would like to harass the neighborhood, driving cars up and down. But they'd be listening to like Stevie Wonder, I was made for loving and stuff like that. You know, it's really, you know, and it wasn't like '64. You know, when Turner, Goodman, and Cheney were murdered. But you know, so that's only 3 years, you know, and it was just, you know, but Mrs. Hamer's in there in her living room talking about, this is at the year after Stokely Carmichael had his march in the shouting for Black Power, and he was becoming very revolutionary before he took the name Kwame Ture. But she's saying, well, you know, I understand why Stokely's saying what he's saying. He said, but it's not going to be a revolution here. We got to vote. We got to get people, these people out. And she was running down the white power structure people that she hated, she still had to get along with, you know. And she was talking about being involved for the long haul, you know. And so I come back to D.C. and I'm waiting to get drafted. I'm 1A. Vietnam's really at its height. And another friend of mine says, look, my friend John and I both took tests for the Peace Corps. He went and spent most of his career in Africa, different countries in Africa. I mentioned I had a Easter analogy. I got when I worked for the Parks Department in Greenwich. I was chopping away outside of a greenhouse and I hit a swarm and wound up in the hospital. And so they gave me these pills to take if I ever got something again. I just mentioned it. And they were going to have me jump through the hoops to go to the Peace Corps. I said, fair enough. I'm also taking tests for the Office of Candidate School because I'm going to be drafted, you know, trying to ignore that. I took this test, and they had these geometry questions, you know, and I'm guessing. And the captain comes out and says, oh yeah, you passed too, you know what I'm saying? Really bragging. I forgot to mention that I had joined Air Force ROTC while I was at Georgetown and dropped out after 2 years, you know. I didn't go to drill. I couldn't get up for that. The guy who gave the class said, geez, you would have gotten an A if you went to drill. You get 0 for that. But, so I joined VISTA.
You all people remember VISTA?
Volunteer Service to America. It was a domestic Peace Corps. And Georgetown University had a campus community program involving students in community action programs and stuff. And I was trying to focus the students on campus issues like the workers meeting the union and stuff, you know. But so I joined VISTA, and the screw up with the pay, but I'm on campus and I walk back to WGTV and I keep doing my radio show. And I think that's an ideal VISTA project.
How often?
1 day a week. 1 day a week. So I'm doing radio and I'm meeting other community organizations. And the one community organization that I really latched onto was called the New Thing Art and Architecture Center. Topper Carew was the director. His partner in setting things up was a woman who had been involved with SNCC, Betty Garman. Now Betty Garman Robinson was over in Baltimore. And before Melvin Deal brought his African heritage dancers and drummers into the program, one of his students was doing the teaching of African dance. Her name is Sandy Barrett. And one night, Topper, Betty, a friend of mine, Will Majors, African-American, who was co-owner of a bike shop in New York. He was my New York, D.C. connection. We'd ride up and down, catch jazz in New York. Saw Art Blakey at Slugs one time. And the five of us went out to see for Chinese dinner and to see The Graduate. And I dropped Will off somewhere, and I dropped Sandy off at 1624th Street. She said, come on up. So, Sandy and I have been together for over 50 years now. You know, and that was another really dramatic, change in my life, and really becoming aware of all the things that you write about in your poetry, the nuances of race and racism. And it was an interesting time also because, you know, here I come just a few months earlier, having heard Ms. Hamer talk about positions that Stokely was taking. And Sandy was involved with SNCC, friends with Stokely and all the other people involved with this nonviolent action group at Howard. And a lot of them were living in the same building. And they were into their black nationalist phase. So it was like, that made our relationship fraught with some issues. Although these folks soon became my friends. One of them was not involved with SNCC. He had his own place called New School for Afro-American Thought on 14th Street. Gaston Deal. Gaston was another friend of Sandy's who I became friends with, but it was like, 1968 was a transition from tension between us to friendship. You know, I kept the radio show on WGTV through 68, going into 69, but I had Papa Carew on my radio show. And somehow he came up with airtime on WANU on Sunday afternoon. So we put the show on the air in the summer of 1969. Sandy and I got married in August, and that September we went to Europe. We went to England, stayed with my English roommate from Georgetown, bought an old van, drove down to Dover, took the ferry to Dunkirk, briefly visited Amsterdam, and then went to Paris. Now I'm going to backtrack a bit because one of my classmates at Georgetown, Carolyn Jackson, she one of the tea hands people too. She wasn't drinking beer, but we'd talk. And her older brother played in the house band at the Howard Theater. Ambrose Jackson. She said, "Oh God, Ambrose, you better catch this show, you know, that show." So we cut class, go to that days at the Howard Theater, you know. And, I remember seeing, the Motown Review type stuff. Sure. But one time, Bo Diddley's playing here, so he was living here, you know, and so keeping in touch with Carolyn and Ambrose. Ambrose moved to Paris, so Carolyn gave me Ambrose's address. And in 1969, not only era of not cell phones, in Paris there's a waiting list for telephones. So he didn't even have a phone, we just had his address. 5th floor walk up. We get there, knock on the door, nobody's home, we're sitting there, we're resting, you know, we hear the steps coming up the stairs. And it was Ambrose Jackson, you know, and so he hooked us up. He said, well, the art ensemble's playing at the Museum of Modern Art, I'll take you there, you know. And he was an entree in Paris to all these incredible musicians. Art ensemble, I met Anthony Braxton, Leroy Jenkins, and Leo Smith, now without Leo Smith. They had a group playing, Steve McCall was playing drums with them. Met all these musicians. Met somebody who was the bureau chief for Time magazine. It was really amazing in terms of the fluidity of people you would meet as expatriates. You know, so you meet rich folks as well as the year folks, you know. And I borrowed a cassette tape recorder to take interviews with musicians and stuff like that. So I interviewed Anthony Braxton. He was inquiring about his formulas. You know, I'll never forget him saying, he says, well, you know, you really don't work out mathematically when you use them anyway. You know, he's very confessional about it in 1969. Leroy Jenkins talking about going to do Sable High School and Captain Walter Diet, you know. While we were there, George Winnie had a double bill of Cecil Taylor and Miles Davis. So that group that Dave Howard started playing bass, but I think Chick Corea's on piano and Wayne Shorter's still with them, you know. And it was like that in a silent way getting into Bitches Brew era, you know. And Cecil Taylor, man, oh boy, what a concert that was. And there were people there for both. You know, it wasn't, you know, like you'd hear, seeing some performances in the States, you know, where people to walk out on Cecil or whatever.
Right.
So musically, Archie Shepp, BYG Records, you know, I went to that company, and came home with a whole stack of the albums, you know, the white covers. Yeah, all that stuff, yeah.
So you were really, I mean, you think back on that time period, it's a incredibly, well, it's tempestuous with this amazing confluence of literature and art and politics. Obviously, and you answered this to some degree, but I was wondering how this impacted your listening habits as a music lover.
Absolutely, no, I was really into the cutting edge stuff. You know, even on WGTV, I'm having senior moments on some of the names of the people. Dave Burrell, I met around that time, the pianist. And he did a record with the alto player whose name I'm blanking on right now, but I interviewed him. And so I'm really into the cutting edge stuff. And on WGTV, you know, I had no hesitation of playing Ascension and free jazz, you know, back to back. You know, I'm not playing for an audience. I'm, you know, playing. You know, it's like, hey, I'm playing for those people who are really into it. You know, people will be calling you up. You know? And so when I came back with all these albums, the new thing had continued. And Eric Rivat was one of the announcers. He was teaching drums at the new thing. And Eric had one of these to die for radio voices, too. He really incredible announcer. So another guy named Ralph Higgs doing the show. And Brother Ralph opted to get some more time on WAMU. So he got time at midnight. And he said, you take the afternoon. You know? And Ralph, however, got into some heavy herb and wound up being hospitalized in the psych ward of Washington Hospital Center. I went to visit him, and he said, I'll never forget this, he said, you know, I got them where I want them now. Talk about the doctors. I think they got you, you know. And at that time, Sandy and I were living in a walk-up apartment at 18th and Columbia Road. And I come home one day, there's Brother Ralph sitting on the stoop. He said, well, you know, my dad couldn't afford the hospital center. He sending me out to St. Louis. and at the stopover at the DC General, I just walked away, you know. But he walked away from the show. And the new thing Art and Architecture Center was transitioning and going out in the 70s.
Early 70s?
Early 70s, yeah. I took it 70s. I was sitting in on 70, but I really got into taking over on 71. And, you know, it was like, it was around the time in our book DC Jazz, Reuben Jackson has a little section on the new thing, talking about the blues festival they had. Topper's learning how to play drums. He's doing blues drums behind J.B. Hutto. And I did an interview jointly with J.B. Hutto and Webster Young. Blues to bebop. It was really, you know.
Folks familiar with, like, Webster Young, who's from here?
Yeah, Webster Young, his nickname, Blue Diz, really incredible trumpet player. Went up to New York, did some things. He's on a John Coltrane album. He's on Jackie McLean. You know, J.B. Hutto, Chicago Blues, you know. So we're, you know, we went back into doing the radio, you know, kind of taking it over, you know.
And this is WAMU?
This is WAMU on a Sunday afternoon. And
people remember when WAMU was like...
So in the 1970s, we have Daphne Muse is in the audience. Her brothers, Vincent, and her other brothers were all involved with the Saturday afternoon show called Spirits Known and Unknown.
Yeah.
Gerald Lee was one of the now Russell Williams. Russell Williams went on to do sounds, got 2 Oscars for doing sound for films for Glory and one of the others. Dances with Wolves. You see, you know. Russell Williams went sound, and Gerald Lee went on to be a judge. just retired from the Fort. His name come up with some prominent cases. But that was like a workshop on Saturdays. So I'm doing a new thing, new music show on Sunday afternoons. And, you know, at that time, in 1970, my wife and I were doing a walk-up. We have a baby on the way. And I'm job hunting. We don't even have insurance. One of the real great characters that I met hanging around, living in the neighborhood around DuPont Circle and 18th and Columbia Road, this guy named Melvin Traylor. He was like in his 60s and we were all in our early 20s. But Traylor and I would play, talk, and drink bourbon. And Traylor would tell stories. He said, well, he could play bass tuba with Chick Webb before he switched over to string bass. He then got a law degree, and I'm going to use his exact words. He said, practicing law in Harlem, not making any money from that. Took the rap for a downtown Jewish lawyer, and came to, when I got out, I had to move out of Harlem, so he went to Virginia, became a house painter. And he got drafted, he's in World War II, and he's stationed on an island. And he said, well, the officers would get liquor, so I was stealing their liquor and burying it. And as soon as the ship was coming in, they'd tell them where to bury it. These are all stories that he'd be telling me while we were playing cards. And I'd get him to listen to my show, and he would be very specific. He liked what you played, except for that John Coltrane in Seattle, Washington. I would play that, you know. Somebody like Traylor was really out for him, of course. But Traylor, well, so Sandy and I live at 1817 Adams Mill Road, and I'm looking for a job. She's getting a job teaching kindergarten at Columbia Road School, and they need the basement painted. So I said, Traylor, if I get this, will we do it? So Traylor and I did the painting. It was incredible, you know, even in the 60s. You know, we wouldn't drink until after the job was over with. He was very serious about it. You know? So he was one of my friends from that era, you know, in terms of the stories and stuff. And I'm doing the radio. I get a job with the Redevelopment Land Agency. And they're drinking in a parking lot. You've got to be so-and-so. And I get steered to apply. I take the government entrance exam. And I'm waiting, you know, for something to come through with the Redevelopment Land Agency. And in the meantime, the government's putting inquiries in. You want to become a Border Patrol agent, go to Waco, Texas? No. The other job was with the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, where I got to, I went for an interview. It was the best job interview I ever had, because they said, well, you have to go through top secret security clearance. Now, in the meantime, a close friend of ours was murdered on the Eastern Shore. Ralph Featherstone died, you know, and the FBI was doing all this investigation. And FBI agents actually came to our house. It was at the same time I got this job interview, and they say, you got a secret, you got to have the FBI investigation. I said, you know, so I told them to decline that job. Eventually got a job with the government and at the Redevelopment Land Agency that I wanted. And it was doing radio on WAMU on Sunday afternoons. Got active in the union, became the union vice president. We sent the woman who was the president of the local to a convention in '72, and she became the first elected official director of the women's program. Made me the president of the local. So I was active in my union local. In '78, I quit my good government job to become a union rep.
You were the first multitasker.
Yeah, so I'm a union rep in October '78, and in 1980, WAMU did me the greatest favor ever in many ways. You know, you think about wanting to do radio full time and all this stuff. So they say, well, we're going to expand the jazz program. We're going to have overnight jazz radio. And it's yours. Well, the biggest favor they ever did was offer me half as much as what I was making for the job with the union, which wasn't all that much either, you know. And the idea of doing radio all night long and going to my job the next day was not in the cards, you know. And, you know, things like, you know, health insurance and all that stuff. By then, we had 2 kids, Aisha and Kenja, you know. And, you know, I'm a dad and hanging out, going to the One Step Down and Blues Alley. And at that time, one of my neighbors, Bill Harris, who used to have parties with guitars at his house where I met Ernest Wrangling and Teddy Burrell, became a friend of mine, hanging out there. He opened a club called Bigfoot. And there was Moore's Love and Peace, Mr. Wise. You know, all close to the house we bought in 72 on Monroe Street. 2 blocks from Shirley Horn's house. You know, and I met Shirley at these places, you know, it's all part of Andrew White, further down on South Dakota Avenue. And, you know, I was working, doing radio, drinking, and somebody told me at some point that there was a jazz history course that you started at Georgetown. So I went to Georgetown University to find out who's teaching this class. The guy's name was Dick Webster. And at that time, I had a bass. So I took a lesson from Dick Webster, classical musician. So I figured out I didn't have time, discipline, or talent. But Dick and I really hit it off. And he said, look, Rusty, I have a mind. The symphony's going on tour, and I need somebody to teach the class for a couple of weeks. Can you do it? Sure. Okay. I'll, you know, and he gave me all his lesson plans or whatever he's doing. He said, by the way, the summer continuing education program took me someone to teach class at night non-credit for adults. You know, and my day job's at night. Why don't you put in a proposal? So I did. So I started teaching at Georgetown University, non-credit class, 1 day a week, history of jazz, and people want more, so then I do a class on Ellington, I do a class on Armstrong, a class on Miles, Monk, Mingus, you know, just cycle in more specialized classes. And back in the 80s and 90s, before the internet, I get 30 students off a mail a catalog. You know, it was really, and I keep running into people at concerts, you know. I just saw a guy at the Kennedy Center a couple of weeks ago, looked just like Ira Hill. He talking about being in my class back, you know, some years ago. So, you know, then I got asked to do some things with the Smithsonian, you know. And I'm active in the union. And so talk about multitasking. They have a program here at the University of the District of Columbia, a master's degree in labor studies. So I take a class. It's fun, you know, so I start, and so I enroll in the master's degree program. So I have a Master of Science. It took me 10 years, but I did it. There were some breaks in my job, you know, getting in the way of the academics. And while I'm doing that, somebody approached me from American University, and they said the teacher, the professor of the history of jazz and rock's going on sabbatical. Can you do the class? I said, no, I'm working during the day. He said, well, if you put in the evening, what night would you want? I said, well, Mondays sounds good. So he gets back to me. So Mondays at 5:30, I was making my way, stealing time from AFGE to go to AU to teach fall and spring for 18 years. It was marvelous. And you know, students that I had got into the music. There was a guy named Antoine Sanfuentes who was drummer, and he became sort of a supporter for Butch Warren, one of the people who really helped Butch out. Tells me about how he really got into the music from that class, you know. And it was really, really, really affirming. But there was sort of a coup d'etat in the early 2000s, so I wasn't, I'll not say goodbye to, just wasn't asked back, you know. So then I was recruited to teach at the University of Maryland University College for a while, taught there for 5 years. But it was all off of meeting Dick Webster, again, serendipity in terms of the teaching part of my career.
I was thinking about Duke Ellington's autobiography, Music is My Mistress, and he said at one point, you know, someone says, go down to this corner, and then you get to that corner, and someone says, go this way, and then you get to a corner, someone says, go this way, and just thinking about these intersections and people saying, well, here's 8 bars or this,
Yeah.
and how that's impacted your life. Do you look back and think, how the heck did I do all this?
Absolutely, yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, one of the things that was really, really important for me, though, and, you know, it's very easy to talk about it now, was at one point, you know, my drinking was so bad, you know, that I quit for a year to see if I could do it. So I went from New Year's to New Year's, and as soon as midnight came around, you know, so, back at it. And it took me 8 months. And it was in August of, I never went to AA. You know, I had these, it's like, my wife and I were visiting somebody out in Virginia, and the guy, her husband, or ex-husband, was a stagehand. So there's no one of those drinking occupations, you know. So he had all this booze in his house, and before he even came home, you know, I got into his cabinet, and then we started drinking together and talking, you know. And the next day, when you're looking for that drink to get you straight, my wife said, what are you going to do now? And I said, I quit. I was done. I had to. You know, it was like relationship issues and physical issues and stuff like that. So the only meeting I ever went to, you know, getting back to friends, was Gaston Neal asked me to go to his 5th anniversary NA meeting. NA is Narcotics Anonymous. Right? So I go to this place off of 14th and Columbia Road to this meeting, celebration of his 5th anniversary. And everybody's telling these stories of stupid shit they were doing when they were high, and what they were doing for the dope and stuff like that. You know, it's like an A meeting talking about, I could think of all the dumb shit I did, you know, DWI, you know, losing my license for a year or whatever, you know. I said, I don't need these meetings. I said, well, great to see gas and off the stuff for a year, you know, and we don't need any more bragging, you know.
Well, you know, people, we know you, of course, as, you know, a writer and a radio personality, but I'm glad you're telling these stories because I think it's just like the DC Jazz book, and I'll go back, this is a bit redundant, so pardon me, but these intersections, and I think something that's sometimes lacking in documenting the music is like the humanity behind the events, and so I'm really, you know, I'm really glad that you're
Let me tell you about,
kind of
you know,
showing us
Connections Family, as you mentioned the book. On the cover of this book is John Malachi. And this is where my wife's family really becomes important. My wife's parents, issues of colorism and all this stuff, they lived on Blackton Avenue and had issues in that neighborhood initially in the 50s, they changed and stuff. But my father-in-law, Tom Barrett's best friend from pre-World War II was John Malachi. And so when I backtracking, when I'm with Sandy, even before we got married, she took me out to a program that her mom was doing, teaching at Kelly Miller Junior High School, even before they called it middle school. Kelly Miller, where she had John Malachi doing a performance, what they call assembly, you know. So that's when I first met John, you know, 68, I guess it was, you know, and the musicians he had with him and stuff became friends of mine. But I met John, and we hit it off. And John would play at parties at the Barrett House. You know, Tom Barrett bought a baby grand, Yamaha baby grand. That was his gift to himself, and he could not play for himself. But you know, either at parties or when John would come over, they'd work on classical etudes, you know, and stuff, and trade off on. And then John would tell me stories about Billy Eckstine's band and Diz and Bird, things you can't repeat, you know, in this company and stuff, all the exploits and stuff like that. And John would come to my classes and talk about the bebop era, you know. And some of the things are really, really insightful, you know. I remember there's some cuts there's an album of Charlie Christian and After Hours and different performances. And there were pieces that were attributed to Dizzy Gillespie that didn't quite sound right, like it was Diz to me. And then when the Smithsonian put out the 2-record set of Dizzy Gillespie stuff, they included one of these cuts. And I played it for my class, and I figured, well, the imprimaturs, you know, these guys, you know, not my impressionistic listening to stuff. And as we're leaving the class, they really, you know, your part was really good, but that wasn't Diz on that piece that you played. You know, I'm saying, my impressions were, well, my ears were pretty good, I guess, but if John says this. But John was so generous with his time with me, you know, it was really a friendship that I really always treasured. And he called me, he said, I'm doing a solo concert at Duke Ellington School, can I come by and talk about it? So he came to my show at WAMU, and we talked about his experience. He said, one of the stories he told was, the Exide Band was on tour in Florida, and after the concert was over, Parker asked him to stay behind, and they were working on changes of Cherokee. And which ultimately became Coco from that day I was born. You know, that piece, masterpiece Coco is based on Cherokee. You know, and he was talking about that little anecdote alone is significant to Parker's, you know, experience with Exide and stuff like that. And John's leaving, and I'm saying to myself, God, I gotta get more of this stuff on tape. This guy. And at that time, WDCU was on the air. And I became friends with Bill McLaurin. And Bill was going to do another interview with John about the concert.
When was this roughly?
87. Mm-hmm. And Bill called me in my office. He said, the interview ain't happened, John passed away. That was John's last interview. And fortunately, this is, you know, where now I'm obsessive about taping everything. I had not even taped that interview. And I put the word out, one of my listeners named James P. Johnson in Columbia, Maryland, had taped the interview. Right? And I did get it. I did get the interview. And it was later that year that WAMU dropped my show. And Edith Smith called me up and said, and somebody from PFW contacted me and said I was going to fill in for Tom Cole one Sunday, and this guy, Pringle, I think his name was, said, yeah, well, we'll get you a show about 2 a.m. or whatever. And Edith said, hey, Rusty, you want to do a show on Sunday afternoons? We got Felix at Saturday afternoons. It was like, come on over, you know. So it was really a no-brainer to come to DCU at that time, in '87. And Congressman John Conyers did a thing on the floor and had us mentioned in the
Congressional record.
Congressional record, right? Right, with background of both of us and stuff like that.
I think so much of, and I'm sure this is true for many of you, you know, again, following the people who not only share the music, but whose love for it is clear. So for me, folks like yourself, Felix, Grant, it was like following people in bands you love. And you thought, well, so-and-so's playing bass, but now he or she is playing for this band or that band. So I was, you know, a big part for me was just following you and where would you go? Where would Felix go? And then people, and I mentioned again, this is not my night, but like on W, you know, when Howard had follow them just like you follow the bands.
Let me backtrack. The 70s, you know, a wonderful era for the music that really gets neglected and put down. I mean, you still had these giants of the music still with us, playing, you know, Roy Eldridge, you know, Dexter Gordon doing his comeback. On Sunday afternoons, I had Art Blakey on my show. I had Dexter Gordon when he was doing the homecoming, you know, with that. Bobby Hutcherson, you know, Sun Rock twice. You know, come up to the WAB studio on a Sunday afternoon. You know, Art Blakey was playing at this place I think it's called the Child Herald. It was more of a rock location. And they had Anthony Braxton there, and they had Art Blakey. I don't remember anybody else that they had.
Farrell Sanders played.
Farrell did he? So Art
yeah.
came up to WAMU, spent 2 hours, 3 hours, however long my show was. It was like his musical autobiography. He's praising me for it. I'm going, what are you talking about? He's Art Blakey. So I go back to the club that night. It's a Sunday night. It was a Monday holiday. Art's breaking down his drums. Hey, Rusty, where do we get something to eat?
Good voice.
Yes. I said, Art, this is DC. There ain't nothing open now. I said, but to me, I was appalled. Art Blakey is breaking down his drums to put it in his station wagon. You know, I said, where's the limo? What this is Art Blakey. And they had John Hicks, Dave Schnitter, Bill Hardman, and a Japanese bassist whose name I don't remember. I could look it up. Mike Fitzgerald has a website of all these gigs that Blakey did. But, and when I made the offer, I said, my house is on your way out of town, I didn't realize we had to go back to the Iwo Jima Motel in Arlington, hang out there, smoke something, and, you know, do whatever. And Dave and Bill said, we're going to take the bus back. So it's John and the bassist and Art. And I'm driving up Rhode Island Avenue with Art Blakey following me. I'm going, Buena, even through Buena. I got one of the first jazz musicians coming to music, Muslim back in the 40s. And Sandy fixed a ham. I don't know what else we had. Art comes in the house. Yeah, I think he opened the fridge himself. Oh yeah, this will do. You know? tore into it. I fixed John a sandwich, gave him a beer, and John Hicks and I were friends for the rest of his life. I mean, that was a real close friendship. Art really adopted me, you know. Like, so whenever he was in town, we would talk and hang together. One time, they had a jazzmobile out of McPherson Square. This is when WPFW was in their office building on 15th Street. And Blakey finished his set, we're talking, and this guy comes up to him. He said, hey, Art, how you doing, man? I haven't seen you since Pittsburgh. I looked at him and said, how long have you been living in D.C.? Oh, since about the 70s. And, you know, I've been coming to town playing at Blues Alley and Pigfoot and places where you're going to tell me you haven't seen me come out and want to talk to me? Come on, Rusty, let's do this interview. And we went over to the PFW studios for an interview. I wasn't on the station, but I was so connected with Art. One other time, he was at my house after playing somewhere. He said, I want to eat Japanese. Okay, God, Japanese, you know. It's a place on Connecticut Avenue, I remember from when I lived around the corner from it. So open. So I took him, you know, and started speaking Japanese to the waitress and stuff like that. But it was also real victorious because that was when I found out he was hard of hearing. Because when you're with a group of people, you know, you're bantering and stuff like that. So that conversation was a little disjointed, but it was. But Art adopted me. I mean, you know, just you know, having my stories or having Dexter Gordon on the show or whatever. You know, it was really. Sun Ra, now that was a conversation.
But you know, again, I would say, you know, you and other people who I say chase the music, and I mean that in a positive way, we got to hear these artists on the air, and you know, at a time when you didn't really, it hard to come across information about. I mean, you had downbeat, but like you said, there was no internet, so I'm telling you all what you know, but that kind of communication brought to the listener and the community is just invaluable, you know. And I have a Fanta orange soda bottle at home from Art Blakey was here in August '77. It was when Bobby Watson played alto, just started with the band. He had an Afro Earth shoes. It was August in DC, so it's humid, and you're playing up at Emory, near Emory Playground. Like, so George Avenue just south of Missouri, or Missouri, from Kansas City. So my friend and I were going, and we're gobsmacked. See, like you know, it's like Art Blakey, and it's free. And we're thinking, we're waiting for like the punchline. Like, we're getting to see Art Blakey for free. It's 80 degrees, 80% humidity. We're standing there sweating near the bandstand, and there's a cooler, and I can't do that gravelly voice. But unless you want some cold sodas in there. So he opened it up, and I took a Fanta orange, and my friend got like a Sprite. And I'm walking home, and my mom said, "What you doing with this empty soda box?"
Art Blakey. Wow. You know, it was really remarkable. And here's the thing. I'm a fan. You know, I don't think of myself as a broadcaster. You know, I met Willis Conover a couple of times, and his ego was such that he sometimes put himself above the musicians, you know, in a way that I found a little off-putting, to say the least. You know, it's like, without these artists, without this music, you know, we're sharing it. You know, and that's just the way I feel. Back in the '70s, when HUR was playing jazz, and WETA was playing jazz with Yale Lewis, and Yale Lewis with the perfect radio voice, and Ron Sutton. I mean, we'd show up on each other's shows. Ron and I would do Charlie Parker specials on HUR WAMU, you know. And I'll never forget one time on WHUR we're doing Parker, and Chip Spann, one of the great DC characters, wrote the lyrics to Mendacity. He had the original '78 bootleg of what was Dizzy Bird, my first LP, that Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie concert, where you know, that was part of his contribution. Eddie Lemon, the late night announcer, comes by with Geraldine Parker, one of Charlie Parker's wives, second or third one, I guess, his DC wife. And Geraldine's there, and Ron's interviewing her, and he said, this is before way before the movie Bird. He said, there's talk, Richard Pryor was talking about doing a movie about Charlie Parker. Who would you like to see play Bird? And she said, Gene Ammons. What? You know, so Ron and I both looked and said, no, I'm afraid he's passed. Shit! Joe's dead? And Ron's going, now no time for a commercial. you know, HUR with all with the great jazz folks, you know, we had back then, you know. It's like, you know, it was remarkable about the community that we had. PFW came on the air, and IMC concerts for PFW. You know, I met Jerry Washington as a neighbor of Ron Sutton's, and when he came on with his persona as the Bama and talked about his girlfriend, I said, "Where did he split up with his wife?" I met his wife, Japanese woman, sweet, you know. He never did. He made up all this stuff, created persona, you know, telling stories, you know. And what was really great was that, you know, for the first, when PFW first came on the air, they had this woman, ex-communist, I'm blanking on her name, she became a dear friend, and I having one of my senior moments somewhere, I got worded out, but so people call up WAMU and complain, you can't say that. And I said, you got the wrong station, you know, you want to call.
Not Dorothy.
Dorothy Healy,
Yeah,
thank you.
okay.
Yeah, Dorothy, God, I loved her.
Yeah.
So Dorothy was on opposite me, so that was fine, but no, somebody, a new manager at PFW said, well, we got a counter program. So they put Wash on opposite me, the other side of the band, playing jazz on Sundays rather than blues. And so Jerry said, well, you know, like I'm playing, put Hassan on, you know, sometimes I'd hear other people tell me about it. Well, whenever I played a scratchy record, I said, well, this is from the Jerry Washington collection of classic jazz. You know, there's this, you know, this interplay that went on among us when there were different stations playing the music. You know, now there's Tim Masters and I mean, we'll tell you from going to DCU to here, PFW was there. You know, I mean, it's just well, we're really blessed to have it, but I'm blessed to be able to do it.
Well, let me ask you, this is like one of my last questions. I couldn't stop your solos. I just wanted to hear. I think this is such an integral, multi-layered story. But you mentioned that you were and are a fan, a lover of the music. As a programmer, how do you find that balance, or is it a challenge to, you know, when you're presenting or putting like a show together, knowing, you know, that the fan is also in the studio with you? I mean, what's your MO as a programmer?
My MO as a programmer, boy, I'll never forget seeing Felix with his scripted commentary and stopwatch and all this stuff. Right from the get-go, I would take records with an idea of what I wanted to play. And one thing that I prided myself on was able to segue music, 2 or 3 cuts that made sense. You know? And also, though, take the time to tell you who was playing on each cut. You know, as if it's a quartet, of course not with the entire big band. We want to say, hey, that was Cat Anderson soloing on that, or this is Rex Stewart on Morning Glory. You know, it's like, you know, that part of it was always important. And interviewing, knowing how to let the person who you're interviewing, you know, talk, and knowing what questions to ask is the other aspect of it. And just feeling privileged to be a part of it for me, you know. I'm in awe of people in this room. Willie Jenkins, for example. Talk about a writer taking the words of Randy Weston and putting it in print. You know, I'm not really a writer. I really struggle. I do minor notes. It takes me forever. You know, somebody might, like, I'll see somebody at a concert, like a Mike West or, you know, Mike Joyce years ago, do something that comes out in the Post the next day. You know, how do you know? You know, or online when you get home. You know, it's like, you know, I'm in awe of you. I am in awe of what you do. You know, I just.
A lot of that comes from writing reviews, though. You know, and you'll see somebody at Blues Alley, and they would say, like tonight, if somebody's at Blues Alley, you go and you had to get it in. Which this again is pre a lot of stuff. You know, a lot of students here ask me about stuff, and I say, yeah, you know, I saw King Tut at Blues Alley. But you know, I go home, I write the review. Sometimes I hop in the cab, say leaving Blues Alley. I do DuPont Circle. I'm writing longhand. Go ahead and write it up. You call dictation. You had to get it, you know. Because my first review I did was Tony Bennett at the Warner, and I'm puffed up because it's like the nerdy kid who sat in the back of the class got to do something, and I'm sitting at home thinking, I'm just gonna, you know, be high on this. Phone rings. The editor said, "You like doing this job?" He said, "You want to keep it? You got 10 minutes to get this in." So that's how I get, you know.
Yeah.
And I guess with poet, you know, as a poet, you're thinking of describing as best you can what. But I mean, thank you. That I just. But it's also, as I said before, comes from listening to programmers such as yourself and trying to understand trying to balance the love for the music and communicating something. I really don't want to take this is such a great opportunity for you all, with questions. I had things, but I just think the direction this is taken is just incredible. So if you're okay with opening up for questions.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
because we could go, remember they used to say back in the day when hip hop started, we could go on and on to the break of dawn with these stories. This is incredible stuff. So don't be bashful if anyone will question.
Sure.
Yeah, I got a very short question.
Sure.
Where can you get that book?
Look,
Is it around book local
books,
stores?
it's in all the local stores.
Okay.
We've been doing a lot of book events. Okay, we got one coming up in the church in Georgetown in a couple of weeks.
Great.
You know,
Yeah, I want to get.
and it's just really, really incredible. This came out of a project for the Washington Historical Society, and we did a journal about 2013, I guess it was, and Maurice Jackson and Blair Reuben are the co-editors, and two remarkable people. Blair Reuben is a Russian scholar, worked for the Wilson Center, and he, actually I met him through a publicist for the Wilson Center, because they called me and said, will you do an interview with him at Busboys and Poets? And this was for a book called Washington's U Street, a biography. And it is incredible in terms of Black Washington, including getting the SNCC component at Howard University corrected, calling it Nonviolent Action Group. I mean, all the details. Blair got it right, so we hit it off. And so that developed, we did a dog and pony show talking about his book at different locations. Well, Maurice Jackson was even much more fascinating. African American, who I met 35, 40 years ago, when he was the Communist Party representative for the D.C. area. And part of, my going back years, I had radical friends who were to the left of the Communist Party. I had my daughter's Montessori teacher, one of the best Montessori teachers was with one of these groups, where she had to go. They had to go to the workplace to organize the workers, and so she quit teaching to become a steel worker. It's like in a steel mill or whatever. All these folks. But so Maurice, Main Street, CPUSA. Well, when the party fell apart, he went back to Georgetown and got a PhD in history, and he's a professor at Georgetown University. And he's had all this radical memorabilia and stuff. His Cuban recordings are just part of the archives here. So Maurice and Blair did the journal, the contributions. Willa Jenkins did parts of it with Bill Brower, and they sold out. And so we want to do another edition. They said, no, you pay for it, And we already said Maurice got the subsidy to do that issue from Ahmed Erdogan's widow, in records. So he went to Georgetown Press. He was very close to the president of the university, and they agreed to publish it. Additional chapters. Judith Corey did the chapter here about the University of the District of Columbia, a great program, Calvin Jones. Chapters on Howard University, Women in Jazz, and it's been marvelous. The book events. I think I changed a few words from the original. I did my work 5 years ago, and now I'm reaping the rewards of just reveling in this book. Seeing my friend John Malachi cover. The best moment for me was, it took to the fourth decimal point above a 2-0 for me to get out of Georgetown. And I'm at this big reception where the president of the university is schmoozing me. So it was great to see Georgetown with this book out.
I guess just the other thing was that it's almost an observation. You mentioned early on about how you didn't really want to be a musician, you wanted to write about it, and you wanted to write liner notes. And I came up in the era of long playing records primarily, 45s, but so I learned a lot about all kinds of music from backs and covers too. And then I learned a lot more from listening to your program in the 80s. I absorbed a lot of it. But now, everything's streaming, even with CDs, you don't get much. I find myself jumping on Wikipedia all the time. Something comes on, it's like I'm listening to Oliver Nelson. Well, who else is on here? So, you know. So I just felt like, are you missing that, or are there other places?
Yes. People still do CDs and ask me to do liner notes.
Right.
You know, so I've done that. And so it's more like product to sell at a gig or whatever.
Yeah.
Will and I got kind of a little tit-a-tat in Facebook with somebody in promoting musicians saying, well, you don't need CDs anymore. And Will and I were old, you know. I could say that now in our decade, Will, right? We want that CD, you know, be able to put it in and read the liner notes and stuff like that. We have colleagues now at PFW come in with a laptop, you know, and you know, and even then, what they're doing is just announcing the major person unless they have side notes, you know. For me, jazz is solo art form. You want to know, you know, who's playing bass on there.
Yeah, that's
You
what I
know.
was getting at.
You know, you want to know, you know, the quintet. You know, well, the five, it's easy to say the five names. You know, it's easy to say who the soloists were if you're playing a big band record. It's part of the music, part of the culture, you know, and that's absolutely essential. Which is why PFW is so important for the announcers we have, you know, and the programmers.
It's funny,
Yeah.
I just was, you know, thinking about the technological continuum. I was just telling the story. When I sub on PFW, I'm usually coming in with like a satchel full of CDs, and the youngins who are on look at me. You know, it's that thing like, they're sweet and very collegial, but you're like the roadside fruit stand or the two-lane highway. You're like, oh, how are you, sir? You've got this compact this. And when you hear it, they say, oh, okay, you understand. You're from the Mesozoic era. But yeah, I do think that the importance of people who love this music want to know. You know, like you were saying, like the Thelonious Monk would say, always know. And you know, we ain't all gone yet, so we still need
Absolutely, no.
other questions.
Yeah, definitely.
So, in 2007, Dave Brubeck had an octet made up of all these young people, two of whom were twin brothers from Texas who played the saxophone. One was a 17-year-old woman who looked like she had put down her pom-poms and picked up this the trombone. And I wonder what has happened to them. I don't remember their names. Dave Brubeck, I taught at Mills for many years, and he got his master's at Mills, and he studied under Darius Milhaud, and then Anthony Braxton was at Mills, and then up until 2 years ago, a member of the art ensemble whose name is on my hard disk, and I'm not bringing it up, was there. But I wonder what happened to those young people in
Yeah, well, you
that
put us on the
outfit.
spot.
Yeah.
Let me, you know, another experience. You know, in my high school, you know, being drawn into the music, one of my classmates' father was the principal of Stanford High, you know, sending his kid to another high school, to the Catholic high school. But they presented Dave Brubeck at the high school and said, come on, you know, and so I'm 13. I had a live concert with Dave Brubeck, Paul Desmond, Joe Morello, Eugene Wright, you know, just being drawn into the music, you know, and so we get, you know, the hipper than now, you know, Brubeck could be trashed for not being, you know, a great pianist, let's say Monk was, but Al, whatever. But he was very important in terms of drawing people into the music and drawing them into, you know, Paul Desmond. You listen to Paul Desmond, you listen to Charlie Parker, you you listen to the other artists. This is one of the things I feel so good about teaching. There was a year in 2010, I'm still working with AFGE, and I got asked to teach the undergraduate class at Georgetown while they were hiring another professor. I actually had guest professors coming, and they were test driving while they hired me, but it was okay. And I'm teaching at University of Maryland University College. I got all these brilliant students at Georgetown, some of whom were musicians. In fact, Braxton Cook, young saxophonist you all got to be familiar with, was at Georgetown at that time because his dad's a law professor and the price was right before he went to Juilliard. So he's in my class. So I got all these students in my class. This Asian woman comes up to me and says, I don't know whether I should take this class because you got a lot of musicians in the class. I said, no, you're exactly who I want to be in the class. And I'll backtrack and jump ahead. When she handed in her final, she thanked me. She said, thank you for making this music accessible for me. In between that semester, with the UMUC class one night in Georgetown and Tuesday, Thursday afternoons, I make the students do a term paper on the artists and performance reports. But I'm wide open. I'm not going to tell you what you go see. That semester, on a Wednesday night, Brad Lindy, with his large ensemble at Blues Alley, had Lee Konitz as a guest artist. And so I go see Lee Konitz. I'm on my own, So there, I'm about leaving all these kids from Georgetown, about a half dozen of them. Hey, how you doing? Brownie points, I'm here, And as I've been relieved, this 50-year-old African-American woman from the UMUC class, she worked for the Postal Service. I don't remember her name, but I do remember she worked in the post office. And she comes up to me and she says, do you think Mr. Konitz would sign a picture of him in our textbook? She took the textbook with me. I said, sure. I go up that little dressing room. I met Lee. He didn't remember me. I met him at the one step down. But I reintroduced myself. Do me a favor. Would you sign this picture of you in the textbook, And, for me, that really made it. I had this black woman who's into neo-soul coming out to hear this 83-year-old white guy playing saxophone. I got to be doing something right, And I got to see Lee again up at the Blue Note for the Jazz Journal Association Awards thing when he was there, and thanked him again, So that, to me, really meant a lot. That hey, I'm sharing this music. It's not about me, but it's about me being able to connect to people about these musicians. It's the musicians that are really, really important. And at a time, it's always a struggle. It's a scuffle for musicians to make a living with getting, a little bit from the CD sales and getting nothing from the downloads.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Regarding liner notes, did liner notes, and this may sound kind of comical, but at one point in history, did liner notes become extinct? I'm 72 years old. Daphne's my sister. And when I was in my 20s and 30s and buying albums, whether it would be jazz or R&B or whatever, there were two things about getting that 78. Pulling it out to put it on the turntable to listen to it, and artwork on the cover.
Absolutely.
And a lot of art on it. And at one point, the artwork became collectible.
Absolutely.
And when you get the liner notes, the artwork on the album covers became collectible and still is.
Yeah.
But it seemed like it had
Well, let me
something to
tell
do
you,
with
what
packaging.
happened was there was a real transition 30 years ago from liner notes on the back of the album cover to liner notes in the CD. And now we have some great CDs coming out with booklets. Right. There's a CD about Shirley Horn. Shirley Horn's the Four Queens, Resonance Records. And Zev Feldman asked me to, he said, we already got, he had some famous person doing the liner notes. He said, will you do notes about Shirley Horn in Washington, D.C.? I wrote about Shirley Horn in the neighborhood, Bigfoot, Shirley Horn, my neighbor, and how she kept adding on to her house as she became more famous and made more money, and finally got the room to hold the full grand piano and brag about it when I visited her, So liner notes are still there. But my first liner notes, I'm teaching at Georgetown University a course on Charlie Parker. I have this lady in my class. I'm going to bring a friend by. So she brings by this drummer, Danny D'Imperio. What was his name? He also played drums with the singer who's jazz on a summer day, Nito Day. Well, he's part of this group called the Metropolitan Opera House, and they have albums out on VSOP records, and so you know, so he said, we can't use Metropolitan Opera House anymore, but can you do liner notes? I said, sure. So, you know, and I had the other, you know, albums that they did, and got the, so I did these, I said, wow, liner notes, back of a record cup, I finally made it. So I'm writing these liner notes, going into the history of the Royal Roost, which was nicknamed the Metropolitan Opera House, you know, with Symphony Signal and broadcast from there. How this group, 50 years later, is being sued by the Metropolitan Opera House, you know, how ridiculous it is, but they're not going to fight the suit or whatever. So I go in there, and then I talk about all the musicians and give their biographies. Back of an album cover. First VSOP CD only release, with just the liner notes in the booklet that I couldn't read because the print was so small. You know, I went to the Xerox machine that was large, so, you know, so that was my first example of doing notes, you know, my life's ambition as a kid, you know, my first time, you know, CD only. You know, but again, really important, you know, liner notes, I think. Yeah, downloading and whatever it is that's happening out there, you know, it's great in terms of the accessibility of the music, but the information, you know.
But you do like, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but you do like to know who's on drums.
Absolutely. No.
Who's on bass.
It's absolutely so important.
It makes you get.
It really is.
It brings you closer to the music
Yes.
that you're listening to. Yeah, there's the featured artist. Okay, who else? And you just listen to the featured artist, and you don't give a crap about who else is playing.
You know, there's a mixed bag. On YouTube, a lot of YouTube presentation features list all the personnel. You know, I don't know about other, you know, Apple Music or anything
Apple's
like
very
that.
hit or miss.
Yeah,
They're very hit or miss.
yeah. When I got an iPod, and what I did was download all my CDs, not all of them, you know. I got, God, when you come to collect the stuff for the archives, I get about 3,000 or 4,000 songs, I guess, different albums, just putting it in and stuff like that. And I've listened riding my bike, you know, and it had me racking my brain. Well, who's on bass? You know, I have to go look that up. I enjoyed the convenience of it, having all that music in that little device, you know, and playing in my ears, hit random, you know, and just ride with music, let the music just go, you know. I love that. But at least I had the CD back, and I'd have to hunt it up, you know, to find out who the bass player was. But, you know, I'd be able to do it, you know. So I don't know about, you know, Apple Music or the other things that you have. Yeah.
Rusty, I'm thoroughly enjoying the retrospect on your career, man. I got one question. It's kind of pedestrian, but I was given a mission by one of your old listeners, a brother named Akram Samad. Now, he said a few weeks ago that you played a cut of the tune That's What Friends Are For, that Dionne Warwick made famous. He said it was done with a vibe player playing the lead.
You know, this is what happens.
Yeah.
No, this is what happens. People listen, and sometimes they confuse us.
Okay.
Because that wasn't me.
That wasn't you. Okay.
No, it wasn't me. I get mixed up for being Tom Cole all the time. You know?
Sunday morning.
Right.
Just an African.
Yeah, this is
Donnie McKesson.
Donnie McKesson answers
He's
that.
on before
That's right,
Larry.
that's right.
On Sunday afternoon.
That's what he
Plays
did.
that- plays
That's
that-
what
That's right.
Does anybody know who
I
did? Who
we
does?
don't, I
Yeah.
don't know the artist, but
Yeah,
I know the DJ you're talking about.
It'll come to me,
Yeah.
probably. I know who the artist is,
Yeah.
and the guy died. No, it's not Roy Ayers. A real obscure artist.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause I've been
And-
searching for weeks.
And,
Just got started.
yes, Donnie McCaffrey was a vice player, and I can almost think of the name.
Right.
I can almost think of the name. But, you know, this has been an issue for me for years now, blanking on people's names I talk to. So I know it ain't Alzheimer's yet, you know, because it happened to me for a long time, you know. You
Thanks
know.
for the effort, man.
Yeah, no, and it may come to me even before the night's out, who it is. You know, I have a brilliant way of coming up with names of obscure
I was
artists.
thinking it was like 3 in the morning though.
Yeah.
I know, like you're going to get a drink of water. It was Dick Schwartz. I know.
Right,
And you
right.
know,
No, I know that, absolutely. The obscures, you know, it is the wonderful thing about this music, you know, is that it is to get into this, putting down the others for the one you want to praise, you know, like the greatest trumpeter ever had to be Dupree Bolton, right? Because he's the most obscure, you know. And one of the things that, you know, Ron Sutton and I, we hanged together back in the 70s, and he called me up and said, look, Sonny Rollins doing a workshop for the students, and we have a chance to take an interview with him, you know, and come on over. He, you know, the generosity among us was just mind-boggling. So we go over and take the interview, and Ron again is one of the exclusionary fans. Boy, did he love to put down Miles Davis. Miles can't play shit, Miles, blah, blah, blah. Clifford Brown, now there's a trumpeter. You know, I agree. Wow, it's an incredible trumpeter. So, he wanted to get Rollins. well, Sonny, you know, you played with both Miles Davis and Clifford Brown. Who was the most important one of the two to play with? Knowing the answer he wanted, right? Like, Miles can't play shit. Rollins says, you know, as much as I love Clifford's playing and as brilliant as he was, and I still feel to this day the hurt from that accident took him away from us. Now this is in the 70s. This is when Miles is not playing. It's after 75. You know, after Fusion stuff before his comeback. So there's controversial stuff already, you know. Rollins says, well, you know, Miles Davis was so important in terms of changing the direction of music, you know, 3 or 4 times, and all of the different things that he contributed, that to me is far more important to have played with Miles Davis, you know. And let me tell you the generosity of these musicians that I love. Some 20, 30 years later, after that interview, so Rollins knows who I am. You know, I mean, that to me is a thrill. I got asked to present Sonny Rollins with the Jazz and Justice Award at a gala that PFW hosted. And so I had some scripted words. I went off script. I've got Sonny Rollins. You know, I'm the one who knows that his nickname Nuke comes from Don Newcomb. You know, my father was a Dodgers fan. You know, Don Newcomb, bless his soul, just passed away. So yeah, I gave the presentation. Backstage, I see somebody, Art Cromwell, former announcer now doing stuff in Cleveland. I see him giving the card to Rollins. I said, oh, shit, what did you say? My card's back then. I don't have cards now. Give him my card. Best thing I ever did. A week later, I get a 2-page handwritten letter on yellow legal pad, letter pad. Dear my man Rusty. Thank you for your kind words.
Oh, yeah.
For, I didn't know whether to wear my political hat or my musician hat, and I hope we can, and it talked about what he was doing in that letter. I mean, he's
I'd still be floating.
Sonny Rock, I still am.
Yeah.
The other generous musician story that I got to tell, from all the conversations at Blues Alley at the bar, McCoy Tyner is playing at the DC Jazz Festival at the Silver Theater, outdoor festival. Gary Bartz is playing a saxophone. Eric Pravat back after 20 years of being a prison guard back on the scene. He went to do that because he needed to make a living. And now he had health insurance in his retirement. All this economic stuff, And there's the piano tuner, Paul Malisi's tuning the piano and nervous. Nervous. I mean, this is McCoy Tyner, And I'm leaning over there, everybody's waiting. He's there, boom. I said, Paul, don't make perfect the enemy of the performance. So I get on stage and I have to include in my introduction the fact that I first saw McCoy Tyner when I was 17 years old, performing with John Coltrane in Newport in 1963, and seeing him perform, with Coltrane at the Bohemian Caverns, with all these years seeing him perform. Here I am introducing one of the most influential pianists of the last 60 years, 50 years, whatever I say, and on saxophone, blah, blah, doing the introduction. 2 weeks later at the WPFW studio, I get a homemade cardboard envelope with just McCoy Tyner written, the return address part, and it's a disc. And I said, he's not sending me copies of this disc. What's he got here? He's got promotion. I go home, put it on. I hear my voice introducing him. He sent me the recording of the concert. How special is that? Now, how special is that? That's why these are my heroes, and for them to know who I am, is why I've been doing radio and teaching. For the black lady who goes see Lee Combs, for students to come up to me and say, well, I got into it. It's not about me. It's about all these artists who are so important that Americans really don't know that they should.
Yeah, I know that, we talked about this last month, and when it's the debt you try to pay back to artists who have certainly, like you, have just altered my life profoundly.
Mm-hmm.
And so what can you do? I think, for me as an erstwhile writer and archivist, that's what I can do is make things available. But no, I think your point is well taken. And also as a, I'll use this term, erstwhile programmer, see people such as yourself, made people like me think, no, it was possible to do. You mentioned liner notes. I used to read liner notes as a kid, and I think, I knew I wanted to do it, but I was also thinking, well, we were still Negro. Could Negroes do this? I was scared because I thought, well, you love this and you probably could do it, but can you do it? So seeing possibilities, whether with the music, with the people, and I think what you shared tonight in terms of, this is all like a great, take a score and you get extra verse stage, it's like your community, your family, it's just wonderful.
Two more stories before I get out of here. One of the best interviews that I did was at the UDC station. And it was August 6th, 1995. It was my father-in-law's 80th birthday. And while they were sitting at the house for a birthday party, I had him come to the studio to talk about the music that he listened to. We did a musical autobiography. He talked about John Malachi, talked about being in World War II, where on his 30th birthday the atom bomb at Hiroshima was dropped, you know. But it was really to have my wife's father, who I developed a really great relationship with. It's always hard. You know, I'm living in his shadow. I mean, he built the stereos, you know, when they had the stereos in the 50s, electrical work. He was a guy, I don't know if he completed high school, but worked the Postal Service, drove a cab, and, you know, raised two brilliant daughters and married to a brilliant woman who's difficult, but, you know, nuts too, I have to say. And I made peace with her also. But that interview was one of the best. And have someone like Askia Muhammad, you know, tell me about what an incredible interview it was, you know, when I ran into him a month or two later. But it was really important for me, you know, that family connection and music and all of that. But then when I just told this story the other day, Thursday, in this very room, teaching my jazz history class. And my top student, Elijah Jamal Baldad, who's enrolled here to take bass now, photographed me talking, and you related you didn't relate the story entirely. But there was a jazz magazine, the Jazz Times. The predecessor was Radio Free Jazz, and Ira Sabin. Ira Sabin called me. This is early '70s. Called me up and said, "Look, this Black Women's Social Organization is presenting Count Basie, and they're having a hard time with ticket sales. Amazing. Jesus." So the night before Thanksgiving, at the Shoreham Hotel, so we have the ladies on your show. You know, yeah, why not? You know, not Count Basie, but you know. So I had two women on my show. We talked about the dinner dance, and we talked about Count Basie, whatever. And they said, "Oh, would you like to come?" I said, "Sure, it's my birthday." This would be great. So, for my birthday, at the suggestion of a close friend of mine, I was smoking back then, my wife gave me two very expensive cigars. I mean, really expensive cigars. So we go to the dinner dance, and I mean, there were empty seats. It was, you know, I was amazed. You know, Count Basie, Shirley Horn sang all. No, she played piano behind Joe Williams that night. And at intermission, I go out to the lobby, and Holly West and I are talking. He's a critic for the Washington Post. We were having a grand time. Sandy comes running out. "You're missing it. You're missing it. Count Basie played Happy Birthday for me." But it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it does.
No. The fact that I miss it doesn't matter because it gets even better. So after the show, of course, there's the after party to hang out up the hotel room or whatever, and so you could be obnoxious back then. So I'm smoking my cigar, you know, the party, you know, enjoying myself, my birthday, you know, getting a little high and get drunk that night at least. But Sandy and I are walking through the lobby, and the Basie band and Basie are going to Boston for another concert, Life on the Road. So we walking out, and there's Count Basie by himself sitting in a chair in the lobby. Wow, we go up to talk to him. Hi, you know, what the show, I'm the guy you played Happy Birthday for, blah, blah, blah. And I noticed that the Count had a cigar in his hand. So I said, "Mr. Basie, would you have a light?" My cigar went out. He pulls out this big Bronson, lights my cigar, and looks at his hand. He says, "Well, this damn thing's useless. It's broken." Talking about his cigar being broken and smoking. So I go into my inner pocket and I said, "Oh, Mr. Basie, have one of mine." And he looked at this, his eyes lit up, he said, "Boy, you have great taste." And my dreams, you know, oh my God. So for me, the thrill was giving Count Basie my birthday gift on my birthday, you know. And A year or two later, Basie played at the Smithsonian. And Sandy and I went to that show also, and I got to say hi to him. But Yale Lewis was there with his camera. And there's a photograph in my house of Count Basie, Sandy Barrett Hassan, and Rusty Hassan. You know, with him with the afro red hair, and Sandy with her African twist on. So meeting my heroes, you know, is why I really revel in doing this, you know. And teaching here 2 days a week and doing the radio, you know, it's just, I met my heroes.
On that
Great. I gotta ask you about Monroe Street, because I grew up on Monroe Street.
Yeah.